Perhaps the rumor started because I haven't been much in the press lately. I have done enough press for a lifetime, and I don't have anything to say these days. I am happy to be with my family, and I will work when I work. I was switched on for 10 years, and I never switched off. Now I am switching off whenever I can. I'd rather be a little less famous these days. Paul McCartney, 1969, Life magazine. Welcome to the Nerdy 30s. I am Nayoma, and I have two very special guests here with me today. Say hello, guys!
Hello!
You should probably say who you are, guys. I'm here with Clint. Clint, we usually go by first and middle name. What's your middle name?
Oh, you have to ask me that, don't you?
Yes,
it's
Muriel, isn't it?
It's Jason.
Clint Jason.
Dun, 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 dun.
Does that work? Would you like that for your name on here, or do you just want to be Clint? Maybe Clint Worthy?
I don't know that I'm worthy, but you can call me whatever you want to.
All right, we'll call him Clint Worthy. It just feels right. And then we have one of our usuals here today, Mitch.
Am I usual?
Yeah, you've been on here twice.
A bit unusual.
You've been on here twice, and no, actually 3 times, because sometimes you just randomly come into the podcast. We're like,
That's
hey, come
true.
over here.
It's usually incidental. It's not in some sort of intellectual capacity.
Right, but
It's usually in a opening a door and interrupting it.
Or Mitch is over there playing video
something
games.
like
that
that.
is accurate, actually. Sometimes he'll be playing video games, and you'll just hear like a giant F, and we're like, what? What?
I'm like, God dang it, Lincoln.
Abe Lincoln?
I'm playing, I'll play Civilization when the world is in Inca or something.
Yeah, totally what happens. But that's okay, because I have the skill of editing. But on today's podcast, we are going to be talking about the Beatles. Mainly the conspiracies that surround them. We're probably going to do a few different podcasts about the Beatles and their conspiracies, because there are a few of them. And we can't fit it all into an hour and a half of a podcast. That would be like a 9-hour podcast, and I don't want to put you through that. So it's going to be like an hour and a half of just the Paul is dead rumors.
Dun, dun, dun.
I feel like when I said Paul is dead, it should have echoed.
I feel like you just need that dun, dun, dun.
Totally. Paul is dead. Is that good?
It's like you need some kind of like crazy music for it.
Yeah,
Hey,
maybe.
Paul is dead.
Maybe you need like an organ. I'll put an organ on
Oh,
there.
that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
I feel like,
So for people that don't know the Beatles, they were a 1960s band. They were the start of Beatlemania. Well, of course, they're the start of Beatlemania.
Of course they started
are
Beatlemania.
They were the start of the British invasion. My bad, everyone. And they're the band that gave us hits like "I Want to Hold Your Hand" and I don't
Sergeant
know.
Pepper's.
Sergeant Pepper's.
Lonely Hearts.
Abbey Road. They gave us all kinds of goodness. And if you haven't listened to the Beatles, you really need to, because they started a lot of rock music and started the inspiration for other bands to start that rock music.
But what does it say about us that we have to explain who the Beatles are to this generation?
I feel like
it's-
if you're not born after 9/11, then you should probably know who the Beatles are.
True.
Yeah.
But I was talking to somebody the other day, and they didn't even know what we were going to... I was telling her about this particular podcast and what we're going to be talking about today,
Right.
and she's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And she's my age.
Yeah.
She's a little bit older than I am. She's 40-something, 48, I think. And she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right. Well, here's
I'm like,
the
are
thing.
You serious?
I came from a family, my dad is hardcore Beatles fan, and he actually has the original tapes and of like he has a cassette tape where he recorded the original Paul is Dead rumors
Oh, wow.
that were on the radio, which is super cool. So I grew up listening to this and learning about the conspiracy theories, and I think it's my dad's fault that I love conspiracy theories in the first place.
Thanks, Dad.
Thanks, Dad. You made me
an outcast now.
You made me a weirdo. Total weirdo. Actually, I was always the weirdo because I loved the Beatles and any kind of 60s music because of him. And people were like, why aren't you listening to ICP? And I was
Nirvana.
like, yeah. I mean, I listened to
But
Nirvana.
the thing is, though, is the Beatles were the genesis of everything. I mean, everything we have today.
They were the genesis of Genesis?
They were the genesis of Genesis.
Phil
But,
Collins. you. I'm sorry.
Nice. No, what I'm saying is they were the genesis of what we have today. Like, everything that we have today, it comes from their influence.
Right.
And it's really kind of like the blues is the influence for all rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
The Beatles were the influence for a lot of the bands today.
Right.
You know, and a lot of people overlook that.
Yeah. Or don't give them the credit for it.
Right, exactly. They're not given the proper credit for the Beatles.
But of course, we can thank Elvis Presley for bringing the Beatles aboard, because it was Elvis that made John Lennon want to start playing music.
Yeah,
And if it weren't for that, we wouldn't have the Beatles. So
I have a theory as well about the Beatles, and it may not.
Mitch's theories.
Maybe I'll have to flush this out and make this its own thing that we talk about. But I have a theory that the Beatles were somewhat inconsequential, and that the Beatles were actually, if it hadn't been the Beatles, it would have been someone else. But that's
neither here nor
they
there.
just happened to be the ones that
Right place,
were
the right
place,
time.
right time,
Yeah.
and were sufficiently talented to
Right.
be able to hold that banner. And then, I feel like they're the one that have kind of
here's the thing. Even
held
if
the
that
test of
is
time a
even
little
if
bit.
that is accurate, they're still the ones that people know that still gave them the inspiration to create other musics. So they still will get the, I don't know, accolades, is that correct? Whatever.
Well,
They still get that sort of honor, in my opinion, because even if there were other bands that were doing the same thing, they're still the band that people saw and people took influence from. So, I mean, you can say all you want that they were just the right place, the right time, but they are the history. They're the ones that made the history and made us appreciate rock music and helped form what it is today.
Right. And it's kind of cool the way the Beatles evolved too.
Right.
Going along with what you're saying, in the 60s you had the really poppy type stuff, but then they got into the 70s, it became more, I don't want to say alternative, but
Acid
it was just
rock, kind
more
of?
acid
Yeah.
rock, just something totally different than what
Right.
the world was used to. And that just goes back to what I was saying about they influenced so many bands because they
Right.
changed their image and their music
Right.
so much over the years.
Yeah. And I
Which
feel
actually that'll kind of come into play when we
Yes,
start
it
talking about
will.
conspiracy. So.
Yes, it will. I mean, they were definitely fad starters,
And don't get me twisted. I'm not saying that they weren't talented or they weren't creative or they weren't excellent songwriters. I'm just saying that I don't subscribe to the great man theory of history.
you don't subscribe to their
Yeah,
religion.
if we didn't have the Beatles, then there would have never been rock and roll, or if we didn't have, any other number of great men through history, that it never would have happened with someone else. But yeah, that's probably another discussion for another day.
Yeah. I mean, I can see what you're saying, but it still was them, and they still hold that hat in my heart. So, sorry. So talking about this conspiracy, so it's called the Paul is Dead.
It's called PID.
Rumors, PID, or there's people that actually believe this, that Paul is actually dead. He died in 1966. The conspiracy itself started in 1969 when a whole bunch of people started noticing a few things on their album covers and Paul himself looking a little different, so they started calling him Fall, like a fake Paul.
Fall.
So the conspiracy is that Paul McCartney died in an automobile accident in 1966 on November 9th.
Which was a Wednesday.
Wednesday.
That is important.
That is very important because it's one of the clues that we will talk to you about later. But apparently, a whole bunch of people started looking at all of the Beatles albums and posters and songs and movies and started seeing all these little clues that indeed, in fact, Paul McCartney is dead and has been replaced by a man that won a look-alike contest named William Campbell or Billy Shears, depending on what you're going with, because some people say William Campbell, some people say Billy Shears, depending on what clues that they more so are focusing on.
Well, let's back it up just a touch. The rumor really began with a guy named Tom Zarsky. He was a guy I couldn't find a whole lot of information on this guy, but he called in a radio show to a radio DJ called Russ Gibb.
Yes.
You know, he's the one that brought it to the forefront, claiming that Paul had died in an automobile accident at 5 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, November 9th, 1966. And so he called into this radio show and told Russ Gibb all this information, and he said, just listen to this song, or this part of the song, and just play it backwards. You'll see I'm right.
Right.
And so Gibb did that. He listened to the song. We'll talk about the song a little bit later. But he played the song backwards, and he's like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And that's when it really took off, because the radio station phones began lighting up. I mean, people were calling in, and as Naomi said over here, people started looking at album covers left and right, going back to 67, which was Sgt. Pepper's, which was the first one after the supposed death occurred.
The quote-unquote death.
Right, the quote-unquote, you can't see us, we're doing quote fingers.
There's quote fingers happening. Lots
there
of
are quote fingers everywhere!
And they're very sporadic.
They're very different from spirit fingers. But,
yes, quite.
But yeah, they started looking at Sgt. Pepper's, and they started looking at the Magical Mystery Tour, and they started looking at some of the others.
Abbey Road, all of
A
those.
Doll's House, Yellow Submarine. So these are all the albums that came out after the fact.
Right. Actually, there are some people that believe that there were clues even before that, which is interesting to me, and it doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the clues. So I don't really know why they would think that, because it says he died in 1966. Why they would have clues to it beforehand, unless it was planted. I know, right? So I don't know why they would have clues to that beforehand. So I'm going to kind of, while we're in here, not talk about those ones, because I don't think that they are actually part of it.
I agree. I didn't really come across anything like that.
Yeah.
So your research must have been more in depth than mine.
I'm a stickler for the facts, and I like looking at different angles, because I'm a conspiracy theorist.
I like looking at different angles.
Different angles. I'm sorry. But I thought that we would start out with Sgt. Pepper, and kind of talk about, the front cover and what you see on the front cover.
Okay.
So, on Sgt. Pepper, it's all of the Beatles are standing there, and they're all in these kind of, I don't know, would you call them army outfits? Colorful army outfits?
Yeah, I mean, it was, but I guess a mix between like an army and a circus outfit.
Yeah,
it's kind of what it looks like. They were, red and blue and yellow and I forget what the other one was. Pink. Mm-hmm. That's what it was. And yeah, it's just a really weird looking cover.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of cool art-wise, but put it all together and it just looks weird.
I always kind of got the feeling of a marching band. And
yeah.
Oh,
Sergeant Pepper's
what
Lonely
they talk
Hearts
about in
March.
the song.
Yeah.
Look at Mitch being a
Sergeant
genius.
Pepper taught the band to play.
Yeah.
There you go.
Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I'm sorry.
Well, it is cool. We talk about that cover, and there's a lot on that cover to talk about.
Yes.
But the first one, and I'll just kind of start it off. If we want, do we want to talk about the lyrics as well?
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
Well, what
Absolutely.
year was that?
1967.
This was 67.
And was it released? This is probably unknowable, but also important. Is
when was it
this
finished?
was released, I assume, after the supposed incident.
Yes, because that was 1966.
Is there any way to know when the artwork was commissioned? If it was commissioned prior to the accident, in quote fingers, or was it commissioned afterward?
Let
That's a
me.
good question.
I'm going to look this up really
While
quick.
she's doing that, though, what we kind of failed to mention was the Beatles haven't played live since '66.
Mm-hmm.
They hadn't played live for 3 years, except for the Apple concert.
Right.
They played I think it was a 5-song set on top of Apple, the Apple Corporation at that time.
And actually, something interesting about that, the reason that they stopped playing live is because John Lennon was afraid he was going to get shot.
In his numerology stuff. That's another podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was kind of big on the numerology, and
yes, he was.
He was very apprehensive about that. But some people say that they didn't play live since '66 because of the whole Paul is dead deal.
Well, there actually was a period of time where they were inactive. It was September 11th, 1966.
Ooh, interesting date.
Forget.
to August 29th, 1966. They were inactive. Nobody knows what they were doing. It's kind of like John Lennon's lost 3 days that he had when he was in California.
Weren't they dying?
Well, it was
Is that what
probably
they were
William
doing?
Campbell going under reconstructive surgery to
Yeah,
look more like
that's
Paul
right.
McCartney.
They were training him how to play the
Exactly.
bass
They're
like
like-
him.
They're like, so you're right-handed.
You've got to do everything left-handed.
You
Yep.
do the-
Hey, Billy.
What if-
hey, Billy, you've got to do everything different than what you're used to.
What if, like, the next appearance they made, like, someone got an autograph from Paul, and it looks like a 3-year-old wrote it because he was writing it.
I swear this was signed by Paul McCartney.
That would be really compelling
That's
evidence.
definitely... Well, there's a lot of really compelling things.
Well, Mitch, you brought up a good point that we'll talk about again in a few minutes about Paul being left-handed, and having to learn to do everything.
Oh.
Billy Shear's having to do everything left-handed if he was a right-handed type of dude.
This is interesting.
Uh-oh.
So here's why the Beatles were inactive for such a long period of time in 1966. They got a telegram while in Hamburg, Germany, that said, "Do not go to Tokyo, your life is in danger." So that's why they didn't play.
They didn't play for that long because of that?
Yeah.
Who sent the telegram?
I'm not sure.
Hmm.
The threat was taken seriously in light of the controversy surrounding the tour among Japanese religious and conservative groups. So I'm wondering if this was right after John Lennon said that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus.
When was that? Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder when that was. That could have been a way for... well, no, I'll hold on to that.
Yeah.
I'll hold on to that. I'll hold
There's
on to
just
it.
so much that we need to get through, and it feels like we're jumping the gun. We don't want to jump the gun
I
too
know.
much.
Well, yeah.
Oh, but we'll get to it.
Right,
It's also
right.
retracing a timeline,
Yeah, it's
years and years and years before we were ever born.
Exactly.
Of 4 people that were probably traveling quite a bit.
It's true.
Right.
It's true. Now, on the album...
getting back to the album.
back to the
Mark.
album, Sgt. Pepper album. So all 4 of them are kind of standing together looking down at what appears to be a grave. And there's a floral arrangement in front of them that is in the shape of a guitar. And people that believe this conspiracy theory believe that inside the shape of the guitar is the word Paul. And
Shouldn't it be like...
they believe it's like a funeral
Shouldn't
that
it be
they're
like
having.
a violin?
Well,
instead
some
of
people say a guitar, a bass.
Right, a bass guitar.
Yeah, but his bass guitar was like a violin bass.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
what it looks like.
Yeah, and there was apparently a floral assistant that decided that she wanted to make it look like a guitar. So I don't know.
But that just seems weird.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, hey, I'm going to throw a guitar and flowers on here.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't make
right.
sense. I
Right.
mean, I guess it can in a certain way, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
What doesn't make sense about that?
I would just throw it. I mean, okay, why just a guitar? Why not make flowers
Because
a
it's-
flower?
Why
Why don't
only
make a
the
flower
bass?
arranger of drums?
Why only the bass
Yeah.
guitar?
I'm going on a limb here. It's a music band.
But
Right,
why only the bass
but-
guitar?
play
Yeah, why only a
guitars.
bass? Why not a drum? Or
Right.
why not, a synthesizer or a piano or something?
I feel like a guitar is more central to rock and roll music.
That's true.
Okay.
What about drums, though? I feel like they might
There's
be
probably
more.
I don't know that album that well, but there's probably a track or 2 on there that don't have any drums on it, but do have a guitar.
Well, okay, so the flowers say Beatles, and then there's a flower underneath the Beatles, and then the guitar, and it looks like it says Paul.
Yeah, it's a flower arrangement.
It's flower arrangement. I don't know. I don't know why they chose that, but it's interesting because right beside the 4 new Beatles, where they're in their marching band outfits, is to their left is the old Beatles in their suits
The old
that they used to wear. And I'm assuming that is kind of like symbolism as the old Beatles are dead. This is the new us kind of a situation, because everyone else that's in the photos around them, a lot of them are dead.
Oh, well, let's talk about some of those people that are on there.
Yeah.
Which was kind of interesting to me. I mean, you had people like Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland.
Right, which was John Lennon's favorite book.
And then you also had Aleister Crowley, the Satanist guy from the 60s.
Right.
Kind of a big deal back then. Let's see, who else was on there?
Marilyn Monroe.
Yes, Marilyn Monroe was on there. There's a lot of pop culture.
Wasn't like Jimi Hendrix on there too?
No.
Something like that. I feel like
Bob Dylan is. Is that who you're thinking?
Bob Dylan.
Yeah, Edgar Allan Poe's on there. There's several different people. And everyone that is on there kind of has
some sort of
darkness.
Influence. Yeah, it was an influence
them.
And it was a darkness to them.
Right, exactly.
And I just found that interesting.
Well, the thing that I thought was interesting that nobody seemed to really mention was right over top of the Beatles, coming out of the ground, is a statue of a man. And it's like just the upper torso and his head. And I'm like, doesn't that go along with the whole Paul is dead rumors where Paul got in a car accident and got decapitated?
It could.
That's what I would think.
Yeah, that's something I didn't see when I was looking at it. I didn't see anything. No, you're right. And I don't think I saw anything about anybody saying anything about that. Right. In that.
But there's just all kinds of stuff that's on this cover. So there's this little doll that's sitting in the corner.
Yes, and the doll is holding an is it Ashton or Ashen? Aston. An Aston Martin.
Yes.
Which is the exact type of car that Paul was driving at the time. And if you look close enough at that car, I believe it's got some red spots on it.
It does.
Which signifies a car crash. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, there's just so... And also, okay, so apparently the doll, the quote-unquote doll girl, is supposed to represent lovely Rita, the meter maid.
Lovely Rita.
Apparently, there are some people believe that song was telling us, oh, hey, this is who distracted Paul McCartney while he was driving. And he didn't see that the light had changed.
Yeah, and that's going to come to play in some of the lyrics when we talk about that in just a couple moments.
Yes, definitely.
But another thing on the front of Sgt. Pepper's, Paul has a hand above his head.
Yes.
And some people say that in ancient Near Eastern religions, the hand above the head symbolizes death or evil. Yeah, yeah. And so actually, you see that on a couple of the albums.
Several, actually.
Paul actually is the only one with a hand above his head. It's kind of interesting.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Now the big clue, and I'm going to hold my judgment on this till towards the end, but the big clue is the drum set.
Oh, yep.
Right in the center of the album, I believe it's right in front of Paul, actually. Because I think he's standing right in the middle.
Yeah, with his little oboe or clarinet or something.
Right. So right in the middle of the album is the drum set, and on the drum set, I believe it says the Beatles.
It says Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Right.
Lonely Hearts is in the middle.
Right. Okay. So what people have done, and this is kind of weird. Seems like you would have a lot of time on your hands to do this, but they would take a mirror and you can put it right in the center of the drum, and when you do, it gives you a reflection, and the reflection says I want the letter, or I'm sorry, the number one spelled out ONE, IX. There's a little diamond. He die. Okay, so now you sit there and you think, okay, let's kind of extrapolate this out. So, I and 1, you put those together.
It's 11.
You get the Roman numeral 11. IX is the Roman numeral 9.
Yep.
And so what is 11/9? November 9.
When Paul McCartney supposedly...
Bum, 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 bum.
He died!
Well, there's a little diamond between the two, and it's pointing right down at Paul, or right up at Paul. And then it's he died.
Yep.
Which is just again, I don't know if that's coincidence. I don't know if it's put in there for a reason, but it just seems like people have a lot of time on their hands.
That's some Dan Brown level shit.
That's some Dan Brown level stuff right there.
It's weird.
It's really kind of weird. So going on, let's flip the album over and look at the back cover.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a more,
This is pretty jarring.
Yeah, pretty jarring. So what you've got is the Beatles standing there looking at you, with the exception of Paul. Paul's facing away from you. Why is Paul facing away from you? Well, because it's not Paul, it's Billy Shears, and he's still got scars from the facial reconstruction surgery.
Yep, that's why he grew a mustache for the front cover, so you couldn't see it. And also, that could be why they put all these other faces in behind them, so that it's harder to detect the fact that his face is different on the cover.
Very true.
Thank you. My favorite clue on this album actually comes from something George is doing.
Correct.
It is my absolute favorite. So if you look at George, his finger is pointing, and on the back cover, all the lyrics from the entire Sgt. Pepper album is on there.
And incidentally, this is the first album that ever did that. This is the first album to ever put lyrics on any album cover.
Exactly. So the lyrics that he is pointing at are, listen to this, Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock as the day begins. And if you continue the line over, so that is from She's Leaving Home. If you continue the line over, it goes into another song. It says, life flows within you without you. Then go on to another song. It says, you're on your own, you're in the street. That is my favorite clue from the Sgt. Pepper album. Because he's alone, he's in the street, and if you listen to Woke Up, Got Out of Bed, Brushed a Comb Across My Head, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
If you listen to that song, oh crap, what's that song called? It actually has a car crash sound in it.
Oh, yeah.
What is that song?
Oh, gosh. I don't remember.
I'm just going to type in the lyrics that I
there
remember.
You go.
Woke up, got out of bed, brushed a comb across my head.
Is it A Day in the Life?
Isn't that
Yes, A Day in the Life. Thank you.
Well, The Day in the Life is interesting, too, because it has another lyric in it, and it says, he blew his mind out in a car.
Yes!
He didn't notice the lights had changed. A crowd of people stood and stared. They'd seen his face before.
Oh, whose face would they have seen before? Could it be
Paul
McCartney?
So the Beatles were really good at if this is a hoax, if it's not, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They were really good at putting clues in here.
They were good at playing it up.
So since we're talking about lyrics, let's talk about a couple more.
Now, I just want to talk about A Day in the Life a little bit.
Okay.
This is something that always stuck out to me that I hadn't seen a lot of people talk about. Day in a Life, I mean, it starts out with John Lennon singing. You know, he said, I read the news today, oh boy, about a lucky man who made the grade. And though the news was rather sad, well, I just had to laugh. I saw the photograph. He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the light had changed. A crowd of people stood and stared. They'd seen his face before. Nobody was really sure if he was in the House of Lords. People think that he says nobody was really sure if he was in the House of Paul. People say that all the time. And then the song continues on with John Lennon. And then it cuts. And the song's very, very different. And it comes from Paul McCartney's perspective. Where he says, I woke up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across my head. Found my way downstairs and drank a cup. And it's about him getting ready to leave to go somewhere. Then you have this car accident sound that happens, and it gives me chills every time I hear that part.
That's crazy.
And it goes into, I read the news today, oh boy, 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire. So it goes back into John Lennon reading the newspaper. So is that how John Lennon found out that Paul McCartney died? He read the newspaper?
Oh, man.
Because they were inactive at that time.
Yeah.
August 29th to September 14th, they were inactive.
That's blowing my mind right now.
that entire song always got me. Like, I was like, why aren't people talking about this?
Here's another thing about A Day in the Life. There's a certain that. Let me stop here and say, the Beatles were the first to do a lot of backmasking.
Yes.
And John Lennon did. I think the very first one was in the song "After the Rain."
Let the rain.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he had something put in there, and basically, he liked it. And they decided to keep it, and it was something like after the rain falls, they all came out, or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But backmasking comes into play a lot for the Beatles, and in the 80s it came in huge for a lot of other bands because there was the big satanic scare in the 80s. Right. And backmasking was huge. But backmasking for the album, Sgt. Pepper's,
let's define backmasking real quick.
Very good, very good.
Mitch, why don't you do that?
I don't know what it means.
Oh, well, it just means that they play it backwards. Yeah. Like the sound is heard backwards.
Yes. So you play a certain, and we'll talk about this here again in for another song, which was a little more, I think, important. But we're talking about A Day in the Life right now. There's a certain section in that song that you play backwards, and you hear John say, "Paul is dead. Miss him, miss him." Now I don't know. I haven't listened to that. I could not find it, but it just seemed. Well, it depends on the section of the song, but it just seems kind of weird.
Yes.
That you could actually hear that.
And the fact that he frequently does backwards music, and that tells you that, John put this in there intentionally, or not.
Right.
We don't know yet. He blew his mind out. That was always one of my favorite songs by them. But one of the things that people always talk about is that Paul McCartney's music changes.
It does.
Very drastically.
It really does. I mean, okay, let's veer off for just a second. But we're talking about the Beatles, and we're talking about some great songs like Blackbird and Hold My Hand, and these things that just really grip you and have influenced a lot of people. But then you get forward in the time, and you hear Paul McCartney put out these weird songs like what is the Secretary song, a Temporary Secretary.
Yes.
Horrible song.
It's not great.
It is horrible.
It's not great.
And then the Christmas song. It's probably the most annoying Christmas song ever.
Oh, Having a Wonderful Christmas Time.
Yeah.
I hate that song.
Oh gosh! And you're just like, this is written by the guy that wrote all these Beatles songs. Really?
When I find myself in times of trouble.
Yeah,
Very
exactly.
different. Very different.
Devil's advocate here, though. Wasn't Hey Jude post-accident?
No.
I thought that was...
No, Hey Jude was not.
What album was that?
White Album. Oh, no, White Album. It is post-accident. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just... I don't know. I guess as an artist, you're going to have some great songs, and
you're
then
gonna
you're going to have
stinkers.
some really crappy songs.
As someone who actually writes music and does music, you will have stinkers.
Yeah, and especially someone who's, I guess you could say, experimental, pioneering sort of musician.
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, even when he was with Wings, he had some really good songs, and then I'm sure Wings had some really crappy songs as well.
Of course.
But
my thing is that the beginning Paul McCartney in the Beatles sounds very different than ending Paul McCartney, because he started playing the piano more. Like his instrument structure changed, and also his voice sounds more raspy, and there's just like little differences that you hear in him. You know what I mean?
Well, it's because he's not Paul.
He's not Paul.
Not Paul at all.
He's not Paul. No.
Well, let's get back to the clues for a moment or two. We're still with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Oh, talk about his patch.
Yeah, that's what I was about to talk about. Yeah. So on the inside cover of the book, you see all the Beatles are sitting there, and there's it's kind of a close up or a tight shot, and Paul is sitting there, and he's got on his blue circus jacket or marching band jacket,
whatever.
And on the sleeve you see a yellow patch or a yellow badge, and it has the letters OP, and the third one's kind of obscured a little bit. A lot of people say it's OPD, which for the Canadians, when somebody is in a car crash and they come in, they're pronouncing OPD, which is officially pronounced dead.
Yep.
However, when they're talking to Paul and the Beatles about it, the patch is actually OPP, which is the Ontario Provincial Police Department.
Right.
And apparently all of the all of the Beatles had gotten that patch, but I think Paul was the only one to wear it.
But why is he the only one wearing
Ooh.
it?
Dun, dun, dun.
You know, something else that they talk about with the cover, just really quick, is him holding a black instrument. Everyone else is holding brass instruments. He's the only one holding a black one. I mean, even Ringo is holding some sort of a horned instrument.
Can I rewind here for a second? The OPD patch.
Yes.
One, that is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
OPD is a real thing.
That's a real thing.
Okay. Are we making the assumption that the Beatles would code that message into the picture, hoping that people would misread the patch?
I think that yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of clues on here in this album and on the following albums that were there. They are there. There's no mistaking.
Right.
There are clues there. Now, whether they're there for a legitimate reason to say, hey, Paul really is dead, or whether they're to say, you guys are stupid.
Exactly.
They're there.
You'll fall for anything.
Yeah, we can't discount the fact that they're there.
Exactly. And I mean, anytime that you have a creative mind and you start looking for something, you will find something. You will.
Right.
So, who knows? Maybe OPD,
OPP
was...
you
done with OPP? Maybe that was planted there for people to look at and to talk over. Because, I mean, the Beatles had quite a big blunder with John Lennon's
Jesus
remark, and people were burning their albums and stuff. Maybe they needed something to distract the people from it and get them looking into their musics and buying their albums again.
Well, I think it also is going to that point. Sales were probably down.
Exactly.
Huge.
Exactly.
And so this rumor served
a great
as
marketing
a great marketing scheme. I mean, just fantastic, because all of a sudden you got everybody talking about, oh, is Paul dead?
Yep.
So people are starting to run out and buy Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah.
And not just Sgt. Pepper's, but maybe they're going to go back and look at some of the other albums as well.
And
so
and
all
see
of
if
a
there's
sudden,
any other clues.
all of a sudden, the sales start popping up.
Yep. Exactly. Is there anything else that you have for Sgt. Pepper?
Yeah. Let's talk about one more lyric.
Sure.
And it's actually in the song Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. The second verse is really kind of interesting. I didn't write the I didn't write the lyric down, so forgive me if I get it wrong. But basically, what they're singing is, "Let me introduce to you."
The one and
the
only...
singer's going to start the show, and we think you all like to know. The singer's going to sing a song, and you might want to sing along. So let me introduce to you. I know I'm screwing it up. don't hurt me. Don't hate me for that. But basically, what it says: let me introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears.
Do you want me to do the actual lines?
Yes, do the actual.
I don't really want to stop the show, but I thought you might like to know that the singer's gonna sing a song, and he wants you all to sing along. So may I introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Now, yeah. So what we haven't talked about is Billy Shears
Or William Campbell.
kind of the same person.
Yes.
Billy Shears / William Campbell, or what I've seen is William Campbell Shears.
Yes.
Was
or
Paul,
William Shears Campbell.
or
I've
William
seen that
Shears
one too.
Campbell was Paul's replacement for the Beatles.
Yes.
So this guy apparently
Alleged.
Looked just like Paul McCartney.
He was found in a lookalike contest.
Enough so, yeah, he won a contest, but he looked enough like Paul McCartney that he could pass for him. And so Theory is that in '66, when Paul McCartney allegedly died, finger quotes, he allegedly died. The Beatles did not want to upset their success. They did not want to upset the people that loved them. And so what they did was they found the guy who won this lookalike contest, and they brought him in as the fourth, or if you really are a Beatles fan, the fifth Beatle.
Actually, technically the sixth.
Sixth?
Because
Ooh,
of Peter.
Maybe I'm not that big of a Beatles fan. Maybe I need to do some more
Their
research.
original drummer.
Yeah.
Is who I'm talking about.
Pete Best.
Pete Best. I met him,
Biggest schmuck ever.
Shots fired.
And no offense to him, but he's like the guy that's like, no Bill Gates. This sounds like a dumb idea. I'm not going to invest in your company.
Well, he actually was on some television show. I don't remember which one it was. They were like, so this is the biggest dummy ever.
Oh.
And they were like, so why did you leave the Beatles, Pete? And he goes, because I thought they weren't going anywhere. Well,
don't take investment advice from this guy.
No.
What do you think about Pete Best?
Well, John, I don't know. I don't think he should stick around.
You know, he probably could have gotten a really good job as
He's kind of a wonka.
as like a music reviewer, and he would like say, "This band's no good."
and then everybody would be like, they're amazing.
Hey, we should check them out.
Exactly. Should I discuss my little thing that I have found of William Campbell yet? Or should I hold off till the end?
Yes, tell us about William Campbell.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I did a huge report on the Paul is dead rumors, but I mixed it with Charles Manson in high school. Chucky M. We're not going to talk about Charles Manson this time around, probably the next. But I got my old report out again because I was going to do another report on it in college. And I was like, okay, well, everybody always looks for clues about Paul McCartney being dead. What about William Campbell? Who is this guy? Mm-hmm. So I started going on Ancestry.com and doing a bunch of research looking for William Campbell. And lo and behold, guess what I find?
Are you related?
No.
Oh.
Yes, he's my cousin. So apparently there was a William J. Campbell from Scotland, born in the 1940s, around the time that Paul McCartney was born, that then moved to Liverpool and died in 1966.
Boom, 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 boom.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of the same thing I found, too, when you're looking at William Campbell. He kind of disappears.
Uh-huh.
A lot of information about him disappears after 66.
Uh-huh.
Could be because he died. He could be because he's not William Campbell anymore, but he's Paul McCartney.
Well, here's the thing that I always wondered. Was it actually William Campbell that they saw in the car and not Paul McCartney?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, that's a good point. And some of the research I did as well, I came across some information that said that, yes, it was Paul's car that was crashed, but it was, if I remember correctly, it was either Paul's friend or Paul's driver,
mm-hmm.
or something to that effect. I can't remember exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that it was Paul's car that was crashed.
Right.
It's just who was in the car.
Right.
That was the big
Or
thing.
did they just kill off William Campbell and have him come in as Paul McCartney? They quote-unquote killed off William Campbell.
Hey, you look too much like Paul. We got to kill you.
No. They're like, we're going to have you be Paul McCartney now, so we have to kill William Campbell.
Oh, so you kill off Paul McCartney.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's another conspiracy theory.
There's so many things.
Oh, why would you kill Paul? But see, here's the thing, though. I mean, from 60... Whenever they came on the scene to 66, so I think it was 63 or 64 to 66,
uh-huh.
You've got Paul McCartney writing a string of hits. I mean,
mm-hmm.
just nailing them. But then after that, there's still some great hits coming out from quote-unquote Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
So...
But they're very different.
They're different, but
They're
I
more
don't know.
ballady, and they have more so of a ragtime feel to them.
Well, I mean, this guy would have to be a phenomenal songwriter in order
Right.
to do that.
Can we talk about William Campbell for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm a little incredulous of this whole thing.
Of course.
So there's parts of this that don't make sense. So let's say William Campbell was a guy, looked exactly like Paul McCartney, is the same person. The same person that's listed on Ancestry is the one that won some contest, which I'm taking for granted that is actually true information. I don't know from a source whether that was true or not, whether he actually won a lookalike competition or not. So let's assume that he did, and that's the same guy. So Paul McCartney gets up, drives his car, fatally dies in an accident.
Mm-hmm.
How did the Beatles, and we're thinking this is a conspiracy that the four Beatles and whoever their handlers were, at the time, I don't know, what studio handlers or whatever they had, or record label handlers or whatever. I don't know if this was the point where they were independent of any record label or whatever. The powers that be of Beatles Incorporated has figured out that Paul is dead before a coroner comes and pronounces him dead and identifies the body, before a journalist gets word that Paul has died and goes down to investigate the accident, before word spreads that this famous person dies, they somehow, and this is a complete question mark, they somehow switch their identities and fudge the records so that he gets identified by the coroner as William Campbell, even though he's in Paul McCartney's car. And then they go about using him as a replacement for Paul, and he, looks a lot like him to the point where people who must be close friends of Paul don't know that it's not him. 2, sounds exactly like him. And 3, writes songs, if not as good, but nearly as good as he did before he died.
Well,
he is then this is the part that makes the least amount of sense to me. They wanted to cover this up, but fill their entire albums with blatant admissions and also clues to the thing they're trying to cover up. That's the part that makes the least amount of sense to me.
you're supposed to wait till the end for that, Mitch.
Gosh, Mitch.
If they were
Mitch.
trying to hide this...
Mitch, you're supposed to wait till the end.
If they were trying to hide this from everyone, why would they go to such great pains to include these
Well, that was
high
our
levels
podcast,
of,
guys.
of symbolic,
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us.
of symbolic imagery?
I think we all know where Mitch stands.
Yes, we do. Well, okay. First off, I want to say that there was a lookalike contest.
Okay.
Tiger Beat held one. And
Tiger Beat.
Tiger Beat held one.
Tiger Beat.
And
Gotta love Tiger
yeah, I
Beat.
remember
They
Tiger
Are they
did-
still around?
Yeah,
no, Tiger Beat's not still
They're
around.
not. I
No.
thought they'd be covering the One Direction phenomenon.
No, they're not. But yes, there was a lookalike contest, and no one said that they. Here is what I would think. The way that it would work was Paul dies in the thing. He dies in the car accident. They call John Lennon. Brian Epstein's in there, and they're all like, "Okay, let's discuss this. What can we do?" And they're like, "Well, this William Campbell won a lookalike contest. Let's bring him on over. He's close by." So they bring him on over. They make it so they fudge the papers so that it is William Campbell that dies instead of Paul McCartney. And then William Campbell takes the place.
That alone is a big step.
You don't
That's
know?
a huge step.
That's
yeah.
a big, big step, because basically either the Beatles had some officials in the government in their pocket.
You know they did.
Or they somehow got ahead of it.
They were the
and
Beatles.
bribed someone.
Think about who they were at the time.
Right.
You have to think about
This
that.
was Beatlemania.
I really doubt the local coroner in Liverpool was such a big Beatles fan that he would risk prosecution and his reputation to keep the Beatles from having to tell the world that their bassist and singer died.
Well, you're supposed to wait for the ending to do all of this, you curmudgeon.
Golly.
You're ruining all the other clues.
Some serious editing going on around here.
I know, we have to edit everything.
But
hold yourself till the end.
I can hold for a little bit, but there's more I have to say about this, so you can continue.
Thank you. Let us finish.
I just wanted people to...
Remember, there's going to be an entire ending where we can all talk about why we think this didn't happen or did.
Right. I continue to have theories, and I will gladly discuss them later on.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's get back to our clues.
Okay, now that we're back from Curmudgeon Corner,
yeah, let's go
move
to
on.
Magical Mystery Tour because we need a peppy pick-me-up.
Right. So after Sgt. Pepper's was the Magical Mystery Tour. That was the next album that came out. And so I only found 2 clues on this one. I don't know what you found, but on the front of the Magical Mystery Tour, and this is what we were talking about earlier before we started podding about the number.
Yes.
I'll let you talk about that one. But
whoa!
On the front cover of the Magical Mystery Tour, there are 4 individuals all dressed up as certain animals, I believe. Mm-hmm. But there's right in the center. There's a walrus. I am the walrus. Nobody knows who the walrus is.
It's John.
Is that certain?
Yeah.
Really?
No, it's
See?
Paul. It really is Paul.
We don't know. But see, my point is, everybody has a different view of who it is, and I don't think anybody really came out and said it.
Yeah.
At least what I found.
It's actually Paul.
It is Paul.
It is Paul.
Okay. Well, because in a line there somewhere, I think John actually says, and here's another clue for you.
Glass
Paul
Onion.
is the walrus.
In Glass Onion, he says, here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul.
Right. So I just thought
he's
that
toying with people at that point.
Well, I think for years, though, there really was some confusion about who the walrus is.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to the Beatles were big into mysticism, Middle Eastern religion type stuff.
Hare Krishna, all that goodness.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, because I think even George had a song about that.
Yes.
But they talk about some of the conspiracy theorists say that the walrus is a big symbol for, in Middle Eastern religions, a big symbol for death and evil again. I don't know if that's true, but that has been some of the discussion. So you've got Paul as the walrus. What does that mean?
Exactly. And also, again, Paul being the walrus, he's the only one in black. Everyone else is in a white costume. I'm not sure what the other animals are because they're difficult to decipher. But
they were big into the big black and white color scheme, and,
yes, they were.
Black and white comes in a lot. And as far as mysticism and symbolism, and we're going to see that again coming up.
I think one of them is like a chicken, and then a bunny, and possibly
a bunny,
possibly some sort of like horned pig or something. I don't
horned pig.
I don't rightfully know, but I'm looking at the picture right now. I'm not 100% positive what's happening, but Paul is definitely the one in black again. Now, one of the interesting things that I thought was neat about this, if you turn the cover upside down, the words the Beatles spells out numbers. It actually looks like numbers. So it looks like 537-1438 or 231-7438 or backwards 834-7132. And apparently, if you call this number, you have to have an international phone where you can call Britain, which I do not, and I wish I did, because I would love to call it right now. But apparently, if you call this number, they will give you more clues.
Or it could just be some, trash driver saying, "Hey, quit calling my phone.
Exactly.
You're bothering me."
Exactly. I actually hope that it's just a little old woman that wants to give you cookies.
Yeah.
She's like, "Oh, hello, dear."
And they're
Would
like,
you like to come over for some tea and crumpets?
The cookies are central to the theme.
The cookie choked on a cookie in the car.
Oh, dearie, I am the walrus.
Yeah, but I've not done that. I don't know.
Yeah, we had talked about doing it on the podcast, but
Can I say how disappointed I am that it's not, you look at it upside down and it says boobless?
That would be very good. But
Anyone who's ever played with a calculator knows what I'm talking about.
I'm very sorry, Mitch. I hope that the next clue can make it better for you. So in the album booklet, in the track list of where it says "I am the walrus," there's a little thing underneath it that says, "No, you're not," says little Nicola.
Nicola.
That is a character from the movie The Magical Mystery Tour. But alas, she never says that to John Lennon, because John Lennon's the one that sings "I am the walrus." And she's like, "No, fool, you're not the walrus. That's frickin' Paul."
It's frickin' Paul.
It's frickin' Paul. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. It's like, why would you put "No, you're not" underneath that? There's no point other than to mess with people to put "No, you're not."
I can just see the conversation now.
Hey, John.
Hey, John.
Hey, Paul. Let's mess with some people.
Exactly.
Just start throwing these little clues in there.
Well, John Lennon, there was a classroom that was doing song interpretation of the Beatles. And they wrote to John Lennon to actually find out what the different songs meant. And he wrote them back, all the different intricate things about the songs, and was like, it's whatever it is to you is what the song actually is about. But he's like, this is what it is to me. So
Right.
John Lennon was really into that kind of stuff.
That's
So
interesting.
It makes sense to me that he would be like, let's do this.
Let's just mess with
Let's
people.
mess with people. It's going to be fun.
John Lennon was, despite all his faults, was a very interesting person.
Yes,
There's no doubt about
definitely.
that.
He
was
was-
fascinating brain.
He was the artsy Beatle,
yeah.
and there's no, you're right, Mitch, there's no doubt about it. He, very interesting, very talented.
Mm-hmm. Very angry.
Very angry.
Very.
He was the angry Beatle.
He was the angry beetle. He was. Although back in the 60s they called him the fat beetle, which I am not okay with because that man is skinny. Well, was skinny.
He just had a fat head.
He
He had a freaking huge head.
he had jowls. Leave the poor man alone. Leave him alone.
Well, Paul was the cute one.
Which,
So another
I've
thing.
never quite understood that, actually.
What'd you say?
I've never quite understood that, actually.
What's
Understood
that?
what?
Paul being the cute one. His face looks...
I think it's because he looks like a sad
Misshapen.
puppy.
I think out of the four, look, I think out of the four of them, I think Paul was a very handsome dude. I think he's probably the best looking of them.
Well,
I can say
yeah,
that. I'm very
it's-
secure in my manhood about that.
It's not much of a contest.
That's true.
All right.
Moving on.
On that note,
I'm gonna go to the next clue. You boys and your thinking of how handsome the Beatles are.
Well, I mean, let's be honest here. They weren't exactly in sync.
no.
It's like they
Don't even get me
they
started.
definitely were very.
Chris Patrick gets me every
Yeah.
time. I don't.
know who you're
I don't
talking
care
about,
who you
so.
are, where you're from, what you did, as long as you're a boy band member. Thank you. But yeah, so if I had to rank the Beatles from cutest to not cutest, I'm just kidding, I'm not going to do that. So another thing that's in the album booklet, the little track list stuff, on page 2, there's a picture of Paul McCartney, and he is in front of a sign, and the sign said, I, you, was.
I, you, was. I pronoun, you pronoun, was.
Uh-huh.
Which, yeah, I saw that too, and it doesn't
Doesn't make sense.
make sense.
But on the movie, The Magical Mystery Tour, Paul McCartney, there's a scene where Paul McCartney is wearing a, like an army general outfit, and there's a sign in front of him then that said, I was.
I was. Now that makes sense. Interesting. That's interesting.
So I'm kind of like, where is the you was? Because there must be something else that has that, because there's something in there that says I was. You know what I mean? So I'm like, I have to look.
Well, I'd like to know where they took those photos, and if those signs are still there, and what those signs. I'd like to know the context of the whole background,
right?
As to where exactly was this taken, and what do those signs represent without Paul McCartney being
right.
Yeah, if you kind of put a cryptic message on the sign, you're kind of undermining the point of signs in general.
Right.
That's true. That's very true. On page 9 of the booklet, there's a picture of Paul McCartney's face, and then around the side of his face, the word hill is going down his face in red. So I'm like, does that symbolize blood coming from his head when he got decapitated in a car accident, and maybe he was on a hill when he crashed?
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
Yeah, I saw that one.
Was he on a hill when he crashed?
No one knows. Possibly.
But I thought there were witnesses that saw him blow his mind out in a car.
I wasn't there.
He
I
blew
can
his
only
mind
go
out
by
in the
what
car.
the Beatles want us to know.
Beatles are secretly ruling the world, and we just don't know it.
We have no idea.
John Lennon's not really dead.
That would be awesome. I can't remember. There is a picture of Paul McCartney with a mustache and glasses, and people are like, "Hold on a second, this doesn't actually look like Paul McCartney," because it actually looks like maybe an old school photo or something. And so I'm like, "Is this William Campbell?"
Well,
before he had his makeover to be a Beatle.
You know what's funny about that is I just watched the James Gordon carpool karaoke with Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
And when they were in his childhood home, they opened up the window. They'd only been there for 4 minutes.
Yeah.
They opened up the shades on his window, and there was all kinds of people out there.
Right.
And so Paul starts telling James about the time when they had just gotten famous.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, I had to try and sneak out of the house, so I put on a little cap, I put on some sunglasses, and I put on a mustache and tried to walk out.
I bet that's what it is.
And he said he walked about, I don't know, 40 or 50 feet. Of course, it would be meters, but 40 or 50 feet out the door, and looked over at his neighbor, and his neighbor was like, "Hi, Paul." it's like his little disguise didn't work.
Well,
so it's just interesting that you bring that one up.
So maybe that's what that costume was. Maybe it was him trying. Although there is a moment in Help where he wears a costume just like that. So maybe he needs to not try the mustache and do something else.
Hey, Paul, grow a beard.
Grow a beard.
Again,
yeah. Grow a beard and wear one of those floppy hats. You know what I'm talking about? Like they wear in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
It's like plaid and comes down your face and stuff. It'll look great. It'll look great, I promise. Then, on page 23 of the Magical Mystery Tour, Your Mother Should Know, Paul...
This was not an album. This apparently was a book.
There is a book inside of it.
Is it really?
There is, yeah. Paul has on a black carnation, and everyone else is wearing red. And apparently, he's the only one that ever has anything black on him.
And here we are with the color scheme again.
Yep, color scheme. Interesting, right?
Is it possible that Paul liked the color black?
I think that's probably the case. But for fun's sake, we'll just say, no, it's because he's dead. He's dead.
You know, when I do see someone wearing black, that's the first thing I think.
You think they're dead?
This person must be dead. Excuse me, sir. Are you dead?
Pardon me a moment
I
Pardon me a moment while I see if you're corporeal. Poke. But that's all I have for the Magical Mystery Tour. Is there anything you have?
No.
Okay.
I didn't go a lot into that one. There was a lot of clues in there that I looked at, and I was just like, I don't really buy into a lot of them.
Right, exactly.
Some of them just didn't make sense to me, so I didn't write them down.
Yeah, there are some that didn't make sense to me either, but just for just so people know them.
Yeah.
That they're there. And, if you want to go and look at these albums and you find something else that you're like, oh, look at this. This is another clue. Let us know.
Absolutely.
I totally want to know what you found because I love conspiracies.
Me too. I love conspiracies as well, and I think this is probably one of my favorites.
Yes,
Just because, here's the deal, guys. This conspiracy has been around 40 or 50 years. I mean, that's a long time.
It is.
If I'll save that. But for the I'm not going to be a curmudgeon like Mitch over here. But I'll save my opinion for later. But I find it fascinating that this particular conspiracy can last for 40 or 50 years.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say about that right now.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Anyone listening to this that has no idea about it, go find some records. Go find some CDs.
Maybe.
Spread this weirdness.
Just maybe you'll fall in love with the Beatles.
What?
And then you can teach your kids and their kids.
Yeah.
And, well, I'd say their other kids, but then that would mean that you would have to live to be, probably 200 years old. But,
That'd be great. That'd be great. Hopefully you do. Hopefully you do, guys. So let's go to the White Album.
The White Album.
Now, there's not a lot going on the White Album. It's white.
Well, it's white for a reason.
Yes.
It's white for a reason, because it's not the original cover.
Right.
The original cover had the four Beatles sitting on stools or something, and they had...
Dead babies?
Dead babies. They were holding dead babies. Dead
Yeah.
babies were all over the place with them, and there's a lot of blood on the cover.
And again...
Could be very symbolic.
Yes.
But the record companies saw that. They did not like it. They didn't think that it would do well for sales.
Right.
So they just covered it with white.
Exactly.
Am I right in thinking that this is not the most metal cover ever? It was actually them wearing lab coats with parts of baby dolls and meat on them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just making it clear that it wasn't like a death metal record that has like
No.
a dead
But you
corpse
got
on
to
the front.
remember the time though. This was 1968.
That would have done death metal for the
Yeah,
time.
1968. That was huge. That would have sent the Beatles into a downward spiral.
Yes,
Yeah, I
it
just
would've.
wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of people say that album cover, the original album cover, is again symbolic of Paul's death. It sounds kind of weird
Actually,
and disgusting, dismemberment. And
Was he
I don't
a
think
baby?
that was the original album cover. I think that was for Yesterday and Today.
let's double check that. I think.
Oh no, I think you're right, Aaron.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Because
their hair is not long and crazy at that point.
On Yesterday and Today, that's what you said, right?
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of decapitated baby heads.
So I also saw
like
that
Paul McCartney.
when that got rejected, they replaced it
Yeah.
with a clue. Or they assumed it was a clue, but this was before the rumor, so it's one of those clues that's not really a clue because
What is it?
it's a clue to nothing.
Say it.
It
Say
had
it.
it had
Say
the
it.
three Beatles that were not Paul
Uh-huh.
sitting on top of a large trunk.
Yes!
And Paul was sitting in the trunk.
Like a
and they're like,
coffin.
it's like a coffin.
Yeah, it's Yesterday and Today.
Yes.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, it's Yesterday and Today.
Which,
Well, I
can
am
we
wrong.
get the date on that album?
Sure. Let's look that up.
Yesterday and Today. It's been 100
So the thing
days.
that's, just as an aside, that kind of confuses me is just the sheer volume of output that they have.
1960. So, recorded October 1965 to May 1966. 1966, everyone!
Boom, 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 boom.
But it's before November 9th.
Oh well.
So this deepens.
This is crow shadowing.
This deepens the conspiracy. It turns out they were plotting to have
Paul dead.
Paul killed.
John Lennon was like, I'm tired of having to share the limelight with you.
I'm tired of you,
I'm
Paul.
murdering you!
I'm so tired of you, Paul.
Exactly.
It's time to get rid of you.
Oh.
Yoko.
Pardon me. But yeah, the White Album, the stuff that I saw on the White Album, there are, it depends on which version of the White Album that you have. On the inside, there's pictures of all the Beatles, and they're all, like, in behind them is all white, except for
Paul's
which is red.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there's on the inside cover, again, there's a booklet, as per usual with the Beatles, because, you know, booklets are fun. There is a picture of Paul laying in a tub of water with blood all over him.
Oh, yeah.
That weirds me out.
Well,
I think it
was just Paul taking a bubble bath.
with blood.
And people...
Blood!
Well, it was a black and white picture, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Well,
but he had stuff all over him.
Yeah, but I think people read a lot into that. I think you could very easily I don't know. I don't want to say that, but
I just think a lot of people probably
see what they want to see.
Right. But I just don't understand what was all over his face.
It was suds.
That didn't look like
Maybe
blood.
it was dirt.
It probably
He was
was dirt.
getting clean.
It probably was dirt.
They're
It was
like,
dirt because he was in the ground.
yeah, he dug his way out. What if
It's
Paul
zombie-
did
Oh
die?
my gosh, it's a metaphor!
Oh my God,
He's
guys!
been reborn!
What if Paul did die, but he came back to life?
You know
He's
what's
a
funny?
vampire.
You know what is funny? Batman comic books had a comic book cover,
Yeah?
and it was Batman and Robin standing there, and Robin's holding the cover of a Beatles album, and Batman's looking over to the side, and on the right-hand side, you've got the 4 Beatles coming down, and Batman's like, 3 of them are alive, 1 of them is dead, and Robin's like, which one? Oh, Zombie Paul! It's Zombie Paul!
Zombie Paul. So here's the beauty of this whole thing.
Yes.
And I'll try to hold back a little bit because you guys got upset with me earlier. But here's the beauty of this whole thing: we can come up with this theory now that Paul is a zombie,
Yeah.
and we can pour over the countless pictures, appearances, albums, interviews, and we could theoretically pick and choose any data point we want and tie them together to probably support this theory enough to make a YouTube video out.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do
Is this a
it.
commitment now?
Yep, this
We're
is a
going to
commitment.
go and make a fake YouTube video.
Yep, this is what's going to happen. This is 100% what's going to happen, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah. Well, given the quality of some of the YouTube videos that we watched yesterday about the Beatles rumors or things, it would not be that hard to do one on par with the other Beatles conspiracy videos out there.
Let's do it. I'm totally in.
I don't
That's-
think we'll
that's
get. I
great.
don't think we'll be able to do like InfoWars level. Of,
Oh, come on, we gotta do some level.
I don't think we can hit that level of perfection, but I think we can do it.
Let's
It's
do
what's
it.
funny is I don't know
Paul
how
is
many
a
people
zombie.
actually know what you're talking about when you say InfoWars.
Paul is undead rumors. That's what we need to start.
I would totally love this.
We
That
could
is
make
awesome.
a. We could make a.
Can we make T-shirts?
We also need to. We also need to find a book or something. Did they ever write any like fiction?
Of course.
Okay.
The Beatles?
Yeah.
Yeah, John Lennon wrote several books.
So let's take one of those and turn it into a novelization of Paul being a zombie. So it'll be like those Jane Austen books where they add vampires to them.
That'll be perfect. That'll be perfect. Well, technically, I think it would be easier to take the Cynthia Lennon book, John, and turn that into the Paul McCartney.
John Lennon Zombie Slayer.
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be the easiest because the John Lennon books, one of them is a poetry book, and then the other one is, I think it's In His Own Right. Is that correct? If I'm remembering correctly. And it's more autobiographical kind of a thing. I have it over there. But it doesn't say a lot about Paul. So Cynthia Lennon's book would probably be our best bet. So I'm going in.
We'll do it.
I'm going to contact Cynthia Lennon and be like, girl.
Who's that guy? Who's the people that published those
That's
books?
awesome.
We need to contact that publisher.
Penguin?
Yeah, tell Penguin, hey, we've got an idea here. This is gonna take off.
This is gonna be amazing.
We've already look. There's
Yeah.
already a YouTube community that is building this conspiracy theory, and we point them to our video, and then we get that sweet advance, and we never write the book.
That would be amazing. Let's do it, everyone.
We got this conspiracy now. This is a real conspiracy. We're actually conspiring to do something illegal.
Is it illegal though?
Fraud.
Fraud is, yeah.
But what if it's not hurting anyone? What if in really small letters we put, this is an act of fiction?
Yeah.
Very small letters. In white.
In white.
On the white paper.
And then you dress it up so where if you turn it upside down, it has a phone number.
Yeah.
You call that phone number.
Perfect. And then, like, Mitch, you can set this up. It's like,
But it needs to
here's
be
a clue.
boobless. That needs to be the number. We need to get that number.
Oh, man. I have to get an international phone now.
It have to be an 800 number.
1-800
800.
say fada. I'm sorry. But back to the Beatles album. Yellow Submarine. Let's go for that one now.
Yellow Submarine.
But we're so doing this.
Okay. So again, I saw Paul's hand is over his head. Mm-hmm. Just like it was on the Sgt. Pepper's.
Absolutely.
So again, evil, death type of stuff.
You know what else is evil, guys?
What?
Zombies.
Zombie Paul. See, that's why the hand's over his head, because he's a zombie.
Common. That's a classic zombie move.
That is a classic zombie move, hand over the head.
There's a lot of
because the
religious-
hands fall off.
There's a lot of religious art that's like that, where you got your hand over your head. So are they all zombies?
Technically, they're still alive.
Ooh,
This runs deep. This conspiracy runs deep.
it's going
Does
deep.
this mean that Paul McCartney is a deity?
Maybe he's a saint, Saint Paul.
He's Saint Paul.
I've made the
now you're
connection.
getting- now
I
you're
will
getting
live
into-
forever.
Now you're getting into the Charles Manson
This
stuff.
is going to be amazing. Yes, we are getting into Charles Manson. 100% getting into Charles Manson.
All right, let's take a U-turn here, people.
So Yellow Submarine, the only thing that I have down is the hand over his head.
Yeah, that's the only
That's
thing I
it.
found.
That's the
too.
only thing I found
Yeah.
as well. All right, Abbey Road.
This is my absolute favorite.
This is a good one.
It is my favorite of all of them. Sgt. Pepper's was good, but Abbey Road is so much better to me for some reason.
My favorite's Rubber Soul. That's my favorite.
Oh,
Beatles
really?
album, yeah.
Okay.
But followed by Abbey Road.
Okay. So I'll start off with Abbey Road.
Do it.
If you look at the cover, and you look at the Beatles, the first thing I noticed was that Paul was out of step with the other Beatles.
Absolutely.
So I think everybody was moving with their left foot forward.
Mm-hmm.
Paul's moving with his right foot. So he's out of step with the other three Beatles. So what does that mean? This was 60. Was this 69 when Abbey Road came out?
I think it was 69.
I think that's right.
So this should have been towards the end of the Beatles' career. Abbey
Yeah.
Road was 69.
It
and
was
then-
September 26, 1969.
so it was one of their last albums. I don't know if it was the last album. I can't remember. It was that or Yellow Submarine was the last album. But to me, it just kind of says, hey, maybe this is kind of the end for us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Paul's kind of out of step. We all know the history. Well, I don't know that we all know because
Exactly.
a lot of people are just not Beatles fans anymore. But Yoko had come onto the scene. There was a lot of strife between Paul and John. So to me, it was saying we're kind of nearing the end of our run.
Right.
So that's the first thing that kind of jumped out to me. What about you?
The first thing that really jumped out to me was that Paul is holding a cigarette in his right hand.
Mm-hmm. And this was something, it was something Mitch was saying earlier about having to do everything left-handed if it was Billy Shears.
Right, exactly. So that was my biggest thing, and then also, if you look at the background, there is a punch buggy beagle, beetle, not beagle. Please don't punch beagles. There's a punch buggy.
If you can punch a beetle, man, you're fast.
But the license plate says 28 if, and Paul was 27 at the time.
And
So he would have been 28 if he had lived.
And that means, what does that mean? That means that if Paul had died, he would probably been one of the first members of the
27
27 Club, which
F.
is a whole nother podcast in and of itself.
I am so excited about that one, by the way. I love the frickin' 27 Club.
It's so morbid, but
It
yet
is.
so interesting.
It is. Somebody said that there's a skull over top of the Beatles, and I don't see it. I couldn't
no.
see that at all. I think you have to stare cross-eyed for like 40 minutes to see it.
Well,
Yeah,
You can
it's like
see-
one of those magic images where you
Right,
have to like.
exactly. You have to stare at it.
You can see skulls anywhere if you drop enough LSD.
Whoa!
True
Well, my thing is, okay, so it's actually a sign of schizophrenia if you see matrixing in different things.
True.
So maybe get checked. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Mitch, love you, buddy. All right, so
that's all the albums. I mean, Let It Be album
there's one
is
more
there.
on Abbey Road that we should talk about.
Oh, yes. Go
yes,
ahead.
this is the big one.
Yeah.
This is
So-
actually the coolest thing, I think. of
This
the-
Abbey Road.
I have it written. I don't know why I didn't say it.
Abbey Road's the four Beatles walking across the road.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is where the color scheme comes into play. The first Beatle to the right is John, and
Yes.
John's wearing all white suit.
Mm-hmm.
The next Beatle is
Ringo.
He's wearing an all black suit.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's Paul, who, by the way, is barefoot. And then the following up is George,
Mm-hmm.
and George is dressed in jeans and a denim shirt.
Right.
So again, we see this whole color scheme come into play. So what people say is that John, wearing white, is the preacher figure, if you will, the cleric. How do you say that word? Cleric.
Cleric?
It sounds like clerk.
Clerk?
I don't know. He's the
Clerk?
preacher dude. So
He's going to be the one doing the funeral.
right, and so that means that next person would be Ringo, who's in black. He is the grave. No, not the grave bearer. I'm
pallbearer.
sorry, the pallbearer. So white and black, and then Paul. Paul is dressed in like a gray suit, which is very neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have on a tie.
Yes.
Doesn't have on any shoes. A lot of people say he's not wearing shoes. Why? Because he's a corpse.
Yeah. In a lot of different cultures, people are buried without their shoes.
They don't need them, so
Yeah.
why put them on?
Yeah. No point.
Of course, you could say that about clothes too, but that would just be kind of a weird type of wake going in to see the person.
Yeah.
Oh, kind of gross. Think about it.
Things have gone.
Horribly askew.
I wouldn't like that.
No. Please,
Mm-mm.
Justice Cat up.
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right, so getting back to it, the last person is George, and he's again dressed in jeans and a denim shirt, and George would symbolize the gravedigger.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole album cover is just really fascinating because it looks like it's a funeral procession,
Yeah.
which is the same thing people say about the Sgt. Pepper's Club. It's a funeral procession or a funeral. If you look at the cover for Sgt. Pepper's, it looks like they're possibly over a grave
Right.
attending a funeral.
Right.
And so with Abbey Road, it looks like maybe they're on the way to a funeral or maybe they're having a funeral. I thought that's just fascinating. It's one of my favorite clues
Yeah, that's a good one.
for this whole Paul is dead idea.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And I have never, ever, ever seen the Abbey Road that empty. It's usually piled high with people. There's actually like statistics that is the most hit and run pedestrian hit area in England.
Probably because
Everybody's
it's always
trying to
tourists
take
trying to
photos.
take
Yeah,
that
everybody wants to
picture.
go see the spot. It's a
Yeah.
famous photo.
It is the highest amount of pedestrian hit and runs.
I
So,
wonder what the percentage is for photo recreations for that album cover.
probably a lot.
I know that. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot, and I'd just be interested to see how much people actually try to recreate that. That photo.
I mean, I know I would.
I think it's a higher percentage than the baby and meat photo.
What?
I'm just going to go out on a limb.
Yeah, I think you're right. So we've kind of gone over all the albums. The only one that is left is the Let It Be album, and that was more of like just what the record label put out after the Beatles had already broken up. So it's just got their faces on it. That's it. Nothing fancy, no clues. Last album, they're done. But I thought we should talk about the differences in Paul's face. So, Paul, before 1966, did not have a small scar over his mouth or over his eyebrow. After 1966, he did.
That is interesting.
Yes. Also, before 1966, Paul McCartney had very interesting teeth. I'm not going to be rude and say they were bad teeth.
They were British.
They're
too.
not
They were-
typical British teeth.
They were crooked. They were crooked teeth. After 1966, they were no longer crooked. I don't know. I mean, I've had braces. You cannot get your teeth that straight that quick. You can't.
Yeah, there would have to be.
You'd have to have had braces.
There would have to
Well-
be a period of time where you would have pictures of him with braces.
Well, you
Right.
also have to remember, and not to poo-poo the idea, but you also have to remember that they weren't touring, they weren't playing live. Paul had disappeared from public view for quite a while.
Yeah.
Hence the quote that we started with, the podcast. He just wanted to be with his family. He
Right.
didn't want to be in the spotlight for a while. So, it could, I'm just saying.
But it wasn't like years worth, though. That's my thing. Because somebody, like, if you look at his teeth, he needed dental work. He needed it, and he needed braces for a long period of time.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have that bad of a problem with my teeth, and I had to wear them for two to 3 years.
I don't know a lot about dental surgery, but is that something that's possible?
I know at the time that they would do dental surgeries to make people's appearance better because, like...
And it's not like he was a poor man.
Right,
No,
exactly.
not at all.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, the television stations...
The telly.
The production houses, I guess you could call them, they would take lots of celebrities and put them through makeovers and would adjust their teeth accordingly. So, I mean, that could be a possibility there.
Yeah, and that happened in Hollywood a lot,
Yes,
too.
it did.
There's
That's
a
what I'm
lot of
talking
people,
about.
That get those.
Now, this is something that I thought was extremely interesting that I found on the interwebs. There is a woman. There are two women that I think maybe one of them might be a man. Oopsie boopsie. Now, I can't say their name worth a poo, and I just want to put that out there before I butcher their names. Gabriella Carlesi? Yeah, Gabriella Carlesi and Francesco Gavazzini. I hope that's how he says his name. These are people that do, what is it called? Forensic. They do forensic structures of people's faces. So I went through and was reading things about them and their work with the Paul is Dead rumors. Apparently, the structure of Paul McCartney's face changes after 1966.
Now, aren't these the people that started out to prove that this was indeed Paul McCartney?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. They started out to prove that there is no truth to the rumor, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. We're going to prove it with this method.
Right.
And so,
And-
yeah, that was their whole idea, is just to put the rumor to rest.
Right. And surprisingly, they couldn't put the rumor to rest. And it actually completely boggled their minds that there were so many different facial structure differences after 1966.
So I'm skeptical of this point for a couple different reasons, but one thing I'm curious, do we have an idea of what sort of methodology they use to do their analysis?
They used photos mainly.
They weren't actually going to Paul McCartney and like taking caliper measurements of his face and stuff. Okay.
No, they went through to several different places. They went to Apple, they went to all these different places, and they got dated photos. And some photos had the same dates on them, but they like scanned through all of them to make sure that they had the right time periods for each photo. And they did one of like Paul McCartney in 1964. No. Paul McCartney of 1966, and then Paul McCartney in 1967. And they looked at the differences from where the pupils set, the jaw width, and so on and so forth. And those were all different from 1966 to 1967, which I find very fascinating.
So I mean, I have like somewhat of a hobbyist interest in like criminal justice.
Yes.
And one of the things that's like a common theme in a lot of forensic science is that a lot of it is not real.
That's true.
So like one thing that's been repeatedly proven to be false in a lot of scenarios is things like bite mark analysis and handwriting analysis.
Right.
And basically, there's a lot of perverse incentives when it comes to
the thing with that is there's a lot of variance.
Well, so there's a lot of perverse incentives when it comes to that in the criminal justice world. But basically, you have these scientific experts, so-called, that really earnestly believe what they're doing.
Yes.
And then you have people who are somewhat motivated to get a result, and more or less they go through these somewhat unscientific means to kind of get these analysis.
Right.
And I kind of get a tinge that that's kind of what happened. Is it's just some people that fancy themselves to be
something they're not.
Something that they're not.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're probably better at analyzing these photos than a common person just because they do it. But in the same way that I could spend 20 hours comparing photos of the same person, and maybe I'll say, nope, this is the same person, or maybe something goes wrong and I make a mistake and it doesn't, I decide that it's not the same person or something like that. It's just, it's hardly a scientific thing.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting if certain things like DNA existed.
This was a fact I was about to get to.
Nice segue.
Yes, that's a beautiful segue. So, apparently, hold on, let me go down to this. The DNA test. So that was the thing that Carlesi and Gavazzini, I think that's correct, I'm so sorry. That was the thing that they wanted the most. They actually wanted to get a DNA sample from his brother Mike, Paul McCartney's brother, Mike. They could not get a DNA sample from Mike.
Permission?
They couldn't get it. They couldn't get permission for one.
Okay. Because they're probably like, who are these crackpots?
Right, exactly. But apparently, in 1962, Paul McCartney had like a brief affair with a German woman named Erika Wohlers, and she gave birth to a daughter named Bettina, I think that's her name, in 1962, which was during the time of the Beatles starting up and all that, becoming famous, blah, blah, blah. People are saying that, well, soon after that, Paul McCartney left her because he just didn't have time to have a girlfriend at that time, because that's when the Beatles were getting big. And apparently around 1967, Paul McCartney agreed to pay $30,000 in support of Bettina. So they tried to get DNA from Bettina, but Paul McCartney never admitted to being his daughter.
Yeah.
He never admitted at the time, or is he still to this day?
Still to this day, he doesn't admit it. Okay, hold on, I'm just going to read this real quick. Once Bettina became an adult, she asked a German court to have Paul McCartney recognize her as his natural daughter. McCartney had to submit to a DNA test, and the test showed that he was not her father. Interestingly, based on an autograph signed by Paul McCartney together with some photos taken for the occasion, Bettina accused the person who took the DNA test of being a substitute for Paul, not the real Paul McCartney. The autograph, for instance, was signed by someone using their right hand. So, there's that.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They had to, like, these two people had to, Carlesi, I keep saying Carlesi and Gavazzini.
Just call him Gabby.
Gav. They had to do some really big damage control because they could not prove that it was Paul McCartney. So, there's that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the most compelling thing to me, because all day long people can talk about these clues that are on the Beatles albums, and it's just kind of like what people can infer from them.
So, did you mention why were they looking into this?
Because they wanted to prove that Paul McCartney was Paul McCartney, and he wasn't a fake William Campbell.
Independently.
Independently.
This is just a couple fans that wanted to dispel the rumors? Or they were a couple entrepreneuring specialists that wanted to have a case that they could point to as
they
as
were
a marketing thing.
They're part of a magazine called Weird Italia. And
this is not helping their credibility.
not at all.
Let me just say that the Weird Italia actually got in touch with these specialists, and they had them do this.
Okay,
So it was to prove that Paul McCartney was in fact Paul McCartney.
So, okay, that's a little different. So
Yes.
that's a magazine
Yes.
as some sort of special interest story
Guess it's better
wanted to
than
try to
Teen Beat.
dispel
I know, right?
the rumors. So the question is, how did they pick these two? I'm gonna say bozos. How did they pick these two bozos? That's got to be an interesting story.
Bless you.
Excuse me.
Because I wonder in Italy how many photo, whatever kind of bogus title they have of like what their job is.
Well, Gabriella is a forensic pathologist,
Okay.
Boom.
and she uses craniometry to do measurements of people's faces, and she's also a forensic odontology. She does forensic odontology, which is the analysis of teeth.
Yeah. Bite mark analysis.
Yeah.
Which, as I said earlier,
Yeah.
yeah.
Francesco is a specialist in computer analysis. So.
Computer analysis.
Yes. So they put their talents together to do the hunt of Paul McCartney, and they could not say that it was in fact Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
The Hunt for Paul McCartney?
Yeah.
That sounds like, the title of our new YouTube channel.
The hunt for
Hunt
Paul
for
Paul
McCartney.
McCartney.
The
We
zombie.
need to create a bunch of different videos that are very similar
Yeah.
on different fake channels. Like Zombie Paul McCartney Revealed will be one of the channels.
Zombie
or-
Paul McCartney ate my brain.
Undead McCartney. We'll have to come up with we should do one that's like a pun or something on like a,
I wanna eat your hand.
Ooh.
I like that.
Live and let die.
Oh.
And let live.
There's so many things
Live and
here.
let die and let live.
There's so many things here.
That'd be a good one.
This is amazing. Can I just say, though, that some of the pictures, I can't tell you about the pictures, but you can look them up yourself of what these people found. The earlobes are different. Like, it's very interesting.
So
The
I thought they
differences.
gave him reconstructive surgery.
They did. That's
Why
what
didn't
the
they fix his
scars.
earlobes?
That's what the. You can't do that. That's what the scars on his face were.
You can't do what?
You can't fix earlobes in plastic
Are
surgery.
they hanging or attached earlobes?
One is attached, one is hanging.
Wait, on the same picture?
Yeah. Two different pictures.
Oh, I was like, dude, if you've got one hanging earlobe and one attached earlobe, you look kind of weird.
Yeah, here. I'm going to show Clint this really quick because Mitch is kind of in a weird angle.
It's like David Bowie.
Here's
how
his
he has
ears.
two different. eye
That's
colors.
1966 to 1967.
Okay.
It's weird.
That
It's
is
different.
that is weird.
Here, Mitch, can you see it?
It looks a little different.
It does look a little different.
I don't know. Maybe
Well,
not.
the only thing that I could say that would make it look maybe like this being different, maybe his mouth is open in this second
Yeah.
one. Because I know when I open my mouth, my ear does go down. But it definitely looks different. And they talk about his teeth, and they show pictures, the differences of his teeth from like 1969 to 1966. It is very, very different. Like, his teeth are long, elongated, and not crooked, whereas in the 1966 one, they are short, kind of shovel-looking, and crooked. It's interesting. But the fact that they are elongated could also be that he has veneers.
Could be.
So,
it could be.
I personally think that he could have just gotten veneers there, and that could have changed. That could have made his jaws look bigger as well in photos. So I don't know. I don't know why they didn't think of this.
Oh yeah, if he had different shaped teeth in his mouth, that's going to affect the shape of his face quite
Exactly.
dramatically.
So I don't know why they didn't think of this, but I thought of it. So
Well, I mean, these are experts.
yes,
Aaron.
exactly. Well, then maybe I should
Weird
be an expert.
Italia-owned.
I'm gonna start my own
employees.
business.
I'm gonna start my own.
Odontologist.
Exactly, I'm doing it. I'm gonna check out all these people's teeth all day, all night. Let's do this.
Yeah,
I like teeth.
But the amount of murder cases that were convicted based on odontology and
Yes.
things like that, the amount of number of cases that were overturned once DNA analysis was available
Yes.
is really staggering. And it's one of those things where it's like, imagine you bite your own arm.
Imagine.
Give it 5 minutes. Are you going to be able to tell which person, if you had two people bite your arm, for example,
Yeah.
and you wait 5 minutes and then you have someone guess which one, which one was which.
Which one's your
They're not going
mouth?
to be able to do it. It's because
Yeah.
it's skin.
Well, I could see if they had like they did. What is it? Where they bite down on the clay and then they
Well,
get
so-
the imprint
so-
of his
mold.
teeth, the
A
mold
mold,
of his
yeah.
teeth. Yeah.
Yeah, not to get too deep in this talking about bite mark analysis, but just
We're already there.
Already went.
think of how many scenarios, how many different murders and different rapes and different assaults and things like that. Why were people biting people so much? Like, that's just such a weird. Like, it was just the amount of murders and things where it's like you murder someone and then you bite them. It just doesn't make any sense sometimes. It's just
People
not.
don't make any sense.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, but it's weird. It would be weird that for some reason every murder that happened in or every murder that happened in a period of time when they were using that in particular places. There's like I don't remember exactly, but like certain municipalities where the prosecutor was later turned out to be somewhat corrupt. They would find that like 95% of the murders had, for some reason, bites on the, they employed bite mark analysis, so we were to believe that 95% of the murders in that municipality involved an assailant that bit the victim. It's just, it's kind of odd.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it was just that the prosecutor was using the scientist to
Bolster their case.
yeah, bolster their case when
Yeah.
there was not actually any sort of biting that happened.
Okay. Well, that sucks.
Yeah.
No, that bites.
Oh! You and your puns. You're good at them. You're good at it. It's because
Puns?
you're a dad.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
There you go. There you go.
Maybe we'll throw some puns in here at the very end.
Yes, please do.
Pun time.
It's puntastic. All right. So we've gone through all the clues. Now, I want to tell you guys what I think is actually going on here with the whole Beatles, Paul is dead. Then Clint can go, and then Mitch can go, because he's been biting at the bit. But this is what I personally think. I personally think that the guy that called into the radio show saw something that was completely innocent. It started to blow up. John Lennon was like, we're going to use this, and we're going to fix this fiasco that I made. and we're going to put all these clues on all these albums to get people talking about it. It is a great marketing scheme. It got people talking about it, and I think he did a great job. That's what I personally believe. And the whole thing where Paul McCartney's teeth and face were different, where he had scars on his face, Paul McCartney wasn't an accident. But it was a moped accident. He was with his brother, and he fell off of it. He went over the handlebars and smacked his face on the ground. So, he wasn't an accident. It was around the time of 1966. That does not mean he's a new person or a different person. And like what Clint mentioned earlier, Paul McCartney's car was in a accident. It was his Mini Cooper. It was January 7th, 1967. He was at a party, and one of his friends was taking his car for a ride. I don't know where he was going, but his name was Muhammad. I don't know what his last name was. I think maybe Hajij. I think that was his name. But apparently the car got into an accident. He did not die in it, but after the accident happened, but there was a few actual rumors that happened. I believe there was a newspaper that had reported he had died, and then it got retracted. So that's what I think. Clint?
I totally agree with you on that one. I think that the whole Paul is dead movement, the whole PID, it's a fascinating conspiracy, and that's all it is a conspiracy. I believe that Paul McCartney is Paul McCartney. I think this character of Billy Shears is something that was concocted, as you said, by John Lennon, because one of the things I read was that Paul had this little saying that he would have every now and then. It's called Shilly Bears. Shilly Bears. If something was kind of goofy or funny or whatever,
Billy Shears.
He would comment Shilly Bears. And you just transpose that a little bit. What do you get? Billy Shears.
Yeah.
And I think the Beatles really like to poke fun at people who have a lot of time on their hands.
Yes.
You know, when you have a lot of time on your hand, you get bored.
Yeah.
When you get bored, you start looking for things to do, and all of a sudden you've got this weird Sgt. Pepper's album art, and hey, let's take a look at this, and all of a sudden, you know, you've got the mirror out, and you're looking at things upside down, and you're seeing things that you can interpret, you know, however you want to.
Right.
And I think you're right. I think that the Beatles had made a mistake with the whole the Beatles are bigger than Jesus statement, and
right.
It cost them a lot. And I think that the record label was probably after them to figure out a way to
fix it
and to get album sales back up. And Paul is Dead just came along, just happened,
just
and boom.
Naturally.
Yeah, and it wasn't. I don't know that it was anything that they planned, but it was there. They saw a great marketing scheme, and boom, they took off with it.
Yeah.
I think John Lennon was probably a very good businessman.
Yes.
To catch on to that. And like I said, one of the other things is that this conspiracy has been around for 60 years. So
right.
that in and of itself tells you just how good of a marketing scheme this is. Paul even came out a few years ago, one of his last albums, and he kind of poked fun at it himself when he released an album called Paul is Live, or Paul Live, or it was something like that.
Paul is Alive,
Paul
or something
is Alive,
like that.
Yeah. I think that as far as some of the clues we looked at today, you know, how the music changed, how Paul changed. People change.
Yeah.
You know, people change over the years. Some of the things that you are hot and heavy into in your prime, they kind of wear off.
Yeah.
You know, as you get a little bit older, they don't have the same allure. Your tastes change, musical tastes change. I grew up listening to country music, you know, old school country music like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson and Conway Twitty and stuff like that. And although I enjoy that from time to time, it's not what I listen to anymore because it doesn't do anything for me.
Right.
And so my point again is that people change. Paul McCartney wrote some really great, solid songs in the beginning, and then as time progressed on, he wrote some meaningful songs to himself, but they just lacked the same meaning that it had to other people.
Right. Well, it was less poppy.
Yeah, it was different, and he was just in a different state, you
Right.
know, and so he wrote whatever state he was in. That's what he wrote, and then now he's back and he's writing more music that's more contemporary, if you will.
Right.
So again, I think it was just all a hoax that the Beatles just latched onto, and
They're like, why not?
boom, yeah, it's a money making opportunity, and they did it, and they did a great job at it.
Yeah, they did. Now, I want to point out that Mitch didn't really know most of these clues coming into this. And I wanted him in on this podcast because I wanted to know what someone who has no idea about the Paul is dead rumors and someone who actually is not that big of a fan of the Beatles had to say about it. So, Mitch, go ahead, baby.
Well, I had a previous outburst that just kind of talked about the logic of this, and it's if you step back, it's completely illogical in every way. At face value, it's completely illogical, and the contrarian in me is hurting because I'm completely in agreement with you that how I suspect this whole thing went down. I mean, the 60s were a weird time.
Yeah.
And, they talk about...
It got weird, didn't it?
They talk about things, what you call high trust and low trust societies. And the 60s was definitely an example of a low trust society.
Oh, absolutely.
Where the people in general were individualistic and did not trust institutions.
Right.
And it's when you're in that sort of scenario...
that state of
Conspiracy
mind.
theories kind of grow and become things that kind of go off like wildfire. And if that doesn't feel somewhat familiar, then maybe you're not paying attention. But I suspect that you had someone with an overactive imagination and access to pharmaceuticals that was looking a little too hard at things that were innocuous and concocted a rumor.
Yep.
And maybe the timing is very, to make our theory click, the timing is very important. Because, let's say this rumor started spreading and the Beatles found out about it and said, oh, this is really stupid. We should troll these people.
Yeah.
Right. And if there's one thing we know about John Lennon, he is a troll.
Yes, he very much was a troll.
He is a troll.
In that, yeah.
I
he
mean,
was
just
a troll
the
before,
line in Glass Onion.
Yeah.
Let me the walrus was Paul. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Him just saying that. That's hardcore troll.
And just the fact that he so vehemently, you were saying I don't remember if we've talked about it, but you were saying before that he was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. To say that, but then also have these blatant messages in the thing, it's obvious
Yes.
that it was some sort of, but
Poking fun.
But looking at the theory at face value, it just makes no sense. And you would have to be on a lot of drugs to think that the logic checks out there. So yeah, like any conspiracy, and this is, I guess, what I'll end with. Like any conspiracy, it's just basically you've got a conclusion, and then you're searching for the facts.
Right.
Right.
Instead of taking data and then working forward and coming to a conclusion, you're starting from the end and then having to find facts. Kind of imagine it like, those puzzles where it's like a plot of a bunch of dots and they're all numbered, and you follow the numbers and then it makes a picture.
Right.
If you just had one of those pictures with no numbers on it, you could pick 2 points and go from A to B and then look behind you and you'd see all of the dots lining up to make A and B connect. Mm-hmm. The real question is, why did you ignore all the other dots?
Right.
You know, so it's something innately human about us that we take so much data in every second of every day, and we have to
try and make sense of it.
Yeah, we have to weed out important and unimportant information based on our values. And if we're going into something with a presupposition that this is some sort of weird conspiracy,
I have to figure it out.
Then it's easy to look backward and line up the dots that are between where you started and where your mind is now, and come up with something that's logically consistent, which in this scenario is being generous, logically internally consistent, but is completely false.
Right.
And one of the things we forgot to talk about, or we didn't really forget to talk about, I was just sitting here thinking about it. 69 was an interesting year.
Right.
69 was the moon landing.
Mm-hmm. And there's lots of conspiracies on that.
Huge conspiracy there. 69 was also the year Woodstock took place.
Large influx.
Mm-hmm. So things are changing for the world. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to look up right now to see when the Manson family murders happened, but I can't get online. I'm thinking it's around the same time, but I'm not 100% positive.
It is.
It is?
Yes.
So things were happening in 69. World was changing. People were, for lack of better idea, I think, they were stressing out about things. And so maybe this is just one way that they got their minds off stuff, is just an interesting little conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
I just found that interesting how it all just kind of happened in the same time.
Well,
those
also
are pretty significant events.
Also, you have to remember that people got obsessed with the Beatles, and in 1969, that was when the Beatles were starting to break up.
Right.
And people probably were looking for something to keep them alive, and the band going. So they might not be getting new music from them as a group, but they're getting clues from them as a group.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't like to let go of things, and they like for there to be more drama for a reason to end than for it to just be, they just didn't get along anymore and they needed to break up.
Right.
It needs to be something more elaborate, because them not getting along doesn't make sense, because they're the Beatles.
How can the Beatles not get along?
Exactly. They're the Beatles.
Yeah.
They're supposed to get along.
Yeah.
They're supposed to make more music.
They changed music history. How can they break up?
Yeah,
exactly.
It's more comforting that something fantastical happened than the mundane thing of just two people
not getting along
not
anymore.
seeing eye to eye, and people changing.
Right.
And something as innocuous as he got a new girlfriend or wife or whatever,
right.
and it's made him change, and now they don't get along anymore.
Right.
Which is boring compared to they died and swapped bodies, and that is just way more interesting.
It is. It's way more interesting, and it probably makes people feel better that their favorite band was no longer there.
Right.
And I believe it was Ringo that first left the Beatles. People always say that it was John Lennon and Paul McCartney. I think it was Ringo that first left. Ringo Starr left in 1968. He returned later, and then George went on hiatus in 1969. John was the first to officially quit the band. Paul was the last. So
it seems like Paul was the glue that was trying to hold everything together.
Yes.
And at some point you just realize it's just not going to work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And there's no one person to blame.
No, I mean, very few bands can start out and end together. Very few. I mean, even the ones that are still around, like Bon Jovi or Aerosmith, of my generation, they're still around, but the members are a little different. I mean, there's Guns N' Roses. I mean, we even see what happened with Guns N' Roses.
Right.
But yeah, to the point that you want your band to stick around, it's just not going to happen.
Right.
You know, it's like I was saying, people change.
Yeah.
You know, you want to go in one direction, the band wants to go in a different direction. You just don't get along on certain aspects of things. It happens.
Yeah.
It happens.
And it doesn't mean that one of them died and was replaced by an imposter. I'm just saying.
Or has become a zombie.
Or a zombie. Or a zombie
does
bass
mean-
player.
Does
Zombie.
mean that they are a zombie.
Well, guys, that's our take on the Paul is dead rumors. You might have a different take. If you think that Paul McCartney is now William Campbell, let us know and tell us why. Because, I mean, I'm open to interpretations. I actually would be really interested in actually being William Campbell. So let me know. Let us
Shilly
know.
beers.
I know. Let us know. Write to us. Talk to us. And if this is the first time that you've ever heard of this, or if you haven't listened to the Beatles, give them a listen. They're really good.
Oh, man.
They changed rock and roll history, and
So influential.
they are.
So influential on so many different levels to so many different people.
Yeah. Even people that don't like the Beatles can see that the Beatles had influence. So give them a listen to. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening to the Nerdy 30s. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, on Podbean. You can go to thenerdy30s.podbean.com. Give us a like. Give us a rating. Hopefully, if you give us a rating, you give us a 5-star, right?
It's got to be a 5-star.
Yes, also pretty soon you'll be able to find us on YouTube under our many sock channels that are going to be pushing Paul McCartney zombie rumors.
Yeah, it's coming, guys. It's not just sarcasm. It's sarcasm. We might do one just for the fun of it.
It's going to be titled, Help! I want to eat your head.
I like that. I like that so much. But guys, thanks for listening. And if you want to hear some more conspiracies, let us know which one you want. I want to leave you guys with a